No profession in the world suffers from a more serious lack of clarity as to the basic requirement of the job than the pastorate. Everybody else seems to know what their job is. Everybody that is but pastors. In fact, if we're honest, clergy malpractice goes on everywhere all the time. It is ubiquitous. It is pandemic. There is definitely widespread confusion about what it means to be a pastor. And along with that comes widespread indifference to biblical duties. And as a result of that, the church has no concept of what the pastor is supposed to be or do. But one thing is clear. Most pastors have no interest in being theologians. Nor do congregations expect them to be theologians. The devolution of theology and biblical scholarship as a serious matter for Christians can be traced back to the absence of doctrine and careful biblical scholarship in the pulpit. This is dereliction of duty. This is clergy malpractice. The pastorate is no longer an intellectual calling. No longer do pastors provide serious intellectual leadership. No longer do pastors move in the realm of theology. They manage programs. They give uplifting talks. They apply culturally invented principles. They give their energy to everything but scholarship. Everything but an intense study of the text which yields sound doctrine. They are practitioners rather than thinkers, rather than theologians. But they have to have content. So, at the best, they broker other people's ideas. And the ideas that they broker are selected carefully by their own whims and desires and the popularity of certain people. So pastors have become middle managers who broker other people's theology and other people's ideas. Whatever happened to speak the things fitting for sound doctrine? Titus chapter 2. Even the goal of biblical exposition is doctrine first, doctrine then understood, its implications, its application, and its exhortation. And the pastor, above all, is not only to teach doctrine, that is the whole purpose of Bible exposition, to draw out of the text the doctrine, the truth, and then to show its implications, application, and exhortation. But not only that, the pastor is also the guardian of sound doctrine. He is to guard the theological, doctrinal integrity of divine truth before his people, in his place, and in his generation. For a couple of centuries, pastors have outsourced doctrine to the academy. Scholarship takes place there. A little background on that. If you were to go back to 1840, in our country, the majority of university presidents were ordained pastors. 1840, the majority of university presidents were ordained pastors. Before that, all of them were. All of them. Things have changed. It was 1977. I'd been here at Grace 8 years or so, and I got a phone call from James Boyce. And he asked me if I would come along and serve on the International Council on Biblical Inerrancy that produced the Chicago Statement. I was actually shocked. I was just a local pastor here at Grace Church. I was in my 30s. It was out of my league. There were 100 men that were chosen. When I got to that first meeting in Chicago, I was stunned by the fact that there were only 2 pastors, myself and Jim Boyce. 98 other men came from academic institutions. And to tell you how hard it was to even find 2, somebody else to go with Boyce, they picked me. I sat in conversation with Jim Boyce and Roger Nicole and kept my mouth shut. I didn't want them to know how ignorant I was, so I just nodded like I really got it. Pastors have abandoned their high calling and substituted lesser functions. Their success and their reputation and their sense of accomplishment is achieved by musical contexts, fashion, novelty, personality, marketing savvy, force of leadership. Rarely do you find a pastor known as a theologian, as a biblical scholar. Rarely are their minds given to the mastery of Scripture and its doctrinal truth. It can be a hard time, frankly, for those who do understand their calling and who are expert in the interpretation, exposition, and doctrine of the Bible, because they're just oddballs. This has to change. Pastors, you must become theologians, biblical scholars. You must become the guardians of sound doctrine. In reality, de facto, pastors are the theologians of the church, not professors in institutions. They're in their institutions talking to each other and talking to students. You're talking to the church. The church understands theology from you, not from them. Sinclair Ferguson said, "We have made little or no impression on the world for the very reason that gospel doctrine has made a correspondingly slight impression on us." That is a tragic reality. Every significant pastor in church history, every significant pastor, the names of whom you know, in church history has been a heavyweight in theology. Every one of them. And they all developed pastoral training ministries, institutions, because the highest form of matured ecclesiology is the multiplication of pastor theologians. It was in around 1650 that the Westminster Confession was basically developed. There were 121 scholars that were collected, spending years refining the great Westminster Confession. 121. They were the brightest minds, they were the theological heavyweights, they were the biblical scholars of their day. Out of 121, 121 were pastors. They were pastors. We need to take back theology in the church. The academy has proven to be a very unsafe place for the Bible. It has been ravaged. We need to take it back. The academy started taking over after the Enlightenment and took theology away from the church. And since the 19th century, pastors have been steadily forfeiting scholarly, biblical, theological influence. And the money has followed the scholars into the academy. And as I said, academia is a very unsafe place for the Bible. In our lifetime, we have all been working to salvage the Bible from academia. How important is theology? It's just a word that means a divine, propositional truth revealed in Scripture. That's our stock and trade. Doctrine is the foundation of absolutely everything. Doctrine is the structure of one's beliefs and convictions, and those are the things that control our lives.